thanks to GLF and Benedict, and I think John, in the emails and of course in my public messages, I kind of mentioned that this is a big fan moment to me. So I keep repeating that. Sorry about it, but it is. So that, the when Benedict first called me about the whole Green Literature Festival, or GLF as we call it around, I said we have to have John. And he was immediately in agreement. And although we were not too sure, we decided to give it a shot. So that's how I wrote an email to you. And thank you very much for accepting and to be here today. So just before I get on with the kind of the book Green Swan, which I have it right in front of me, I have read it a couple of times. I have a separate notebook where I have notes about this book. So for the audience today, just as an introduction, I know many of the people would have joined knowing who John Elkington is, but in case if you don't, if you know sustainability, and if you know sustainability as triple bottom line, here is the person who coined the concept of TBL. Of course, in 2018, he decided that it was time to call back the concept. We will try to catch up on that a little later. But he is a writer, the primary reason why he is here. And he is a leading thought leader in the space, a serial entrepreneur. He has co-founded 4 social purpose businesses since 1978, and all of them still exist. So that's sustainability. And he is on multiple boards of many leading institutions, teaches in many of the leading colleges. I will not get into the list of awards and recognitions, and would just say that one of the most coveted personality in the space of environment is here with us today. So thanks once again, John, to be here. And I think we in this forum, I would like to kind of start by asking you. Your first book was 1980, The Ecology of Tomorrow's World, and that was at the age of 30. And it was an era unlike now. You can do self-publishing now, but in that era, you need to get a publishing house to be convinced to write a book, right? So, I would like to start with my question as to how it all started. How did you, become the first, the first book, become an author, and now with the 20th book, you have been very prolific, and consistent. So first, asking you about how it all started, and then how are you able to keep that prolific nature?
Well, Santosh, thanks very much for the question. I wish I had a clear and sensible answer because, in a way, I surprised myself constantly. If you had told me when I was in my teenage years that I would even write one book, I didn't come from a family that wrote books. And so it would have been a considerable surprise. If you had told me that I would write quite so many, and that maybe half of them have had green somewhere in the title, that would have been a surprise to me as well. But I always wrote, and even when I was at school, I would write short stories, and then I would be asked after lunch to sort of keep the other boys in the school quiet. So I'd read them some of the short stories, which were probably terrible, but it nonetheless kept them quiet. But it was much, much later. And my wife, I met her in 1968. So we've been together now for over 50 years. And if I had to take one reason why I've been able to write so many books and so much other material while having other lives at the same time, it would be Elaine. She's basically kept my normal life on track with the children and so on, and interested in many of the same things. But the first book, which you kindly asked about, came out of a period where I had written for one of our magazines called New Scientist for about 5 years. And this was while I was doing it freelance. So I was at the same time, I was involved in Britain's first environmental consultancy and doing work in different places like Egypt and Singapore and so on. But I started to write for New Scientist, and they very kindly asked me to do a monthly feature article, which I started off doing things around what governments were doing, and then I started on looking at what business was doing. And that led to me being invited to set up the first publishing company on what business was doing on safety, health, and environment. called Environmental Data Services. And I ran that for 5 years. And it was the work that I did there that sort of then turned into that first book. And I found a publisher, a business publisher, through books that they'd previously published. And they've been bought many times since then, so they've disappeared from the landscape. But they gave me the opportunity to publish that first book. And since then, just to conclude on that point, I've published with probably 10 or 12 different publishers, Penguin several times, Harvard Business Review. I mean, some really well-known publishers, but about 8 of the books, 9 of the books came out with a small publisher called Gollancz, who were incredibly well-known for science fiction and areas like that, but decided to go into the green space in the late 1980s. So it's been a complicated story and very difficult to forecast looking forward. It's easier looking back.
What keeps you writing? I mean, I just want to know, like, is it a kind of a external environment, or is it an interest on a particular topic? What keeps that?
Well, in a simple way, I mean, I think I use writing to learn. And so when I sit down to write a book, I don't necessarily have a sense of where it's going to take me, what the journey is going to involve. And quite often, I've used a book that I'm writing as an excuse to travel to different parts of the world and talk to people. And stuff comes out of that, which, you know, you don't necessarily imagine right at the start of the process. And just to your question, I think I was born in some ways as a writer of books. And I've been a vegetarian for almost 50 years now, but when I was very young, somebody killed and opened up a chicken in front of me. And what I had never realized is that, and it's true of girls and women, but every egg that will ever be produced in their lives is already in their bodies. And in a chicken, you see this tape, almost like with two pairs of eggs coming all the way through. And I think in a way, I was born not with particular books already in my brain, but with a drive, a propensity to sort of just do them. And it's been just really weird. People send me photographs from around the world, from Tibet, up in the mountains, from Norway, from near a fjord. They've gone to places, and in a hotel or in a book rack by a Norwegian fjord or whatever, they'll send me photographs of the books. It's like having lots of children, and they just go out and do what they do. And it's quite nice sometimes to hear what they've been up to.
Yeah. And just before I start with the next point, John, I just want to tell the audience that you can put your questions into the Q&A box. So maybe after this question, and I can pick up one of those questions and ask John as well. So please key in your questions if you have any to ask to John. So John, you know, I just want to show off saying that I have read your book. So I'm going to use some of the terminologies we have used in the book.
Oh dear, I hope I recognize it.
Okay, you know, the Green Swan, caterpillar economy to Green Swan, regenerative economy. So you now know that, you know, I have been reading the book. So would like to hear from you the concept of Green Swan, although, you know, the people who have read it would have got it. But if there are still people out there who are just looking at what is the Green Swan all about, you do start the book with a reference of Taleb's Black Swan, and then move into the Green Swan. So from your words, would like to hear what is Green Swan about?
Well, you've delightfully muddied the water by bringing in both two metaphors. One is the caterpillar through the chrysalis to the butterflies, I thought, but then the second one is the green swan and the linked idea of the ugly duckling. Let me just very quickly knock the caterpillar one to one side. I use metaphors because they can help all of us, in a way, imagine things that we otherwise would not be able to imagine or envision or whatever. And one of the things that really struck me when I started 20 years ago, I wrote a book called The Chrysalis Economy. And it was built around the idea that our global economy was moving into a period where many of the technologies, many of the business models, many of the industries that evolved since the Second World War, or before then and through, were beginning to get to the point of breaking down and disappearing. So fossil fuels would be a very striking example of that. And what I hadn't realized until I started doing the research for the book and talking to biologists is that one of the things that happens, and many people here will know it, partly because it's become better known over the decades, but that when a butterfly goes into the chrysalis, everything that was the butterfly melts down. And so every organ of the butterfly becomes part of this sort of slurry, this sort of slippery, almost mud of, but that's nutrients. And out of that, these things called imaginal cells move around, and they're like living blueprints, and they create the butterfly. And none of the organs of the butterfly are anything like the organs of the caterpillar that went before. And the caterpillar has this incredible appetite. It's always eating, whereas the butterfly isn't, and it cross-pollinates a wider world. And the point was that our economies need to go through a similar transition. So when I was working on my 20th book, and it wasn't called Green Swans, it was actually going to be about artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence both excites me and really, really profoundly worries me. And the question I had in the back of my mind is, could we get to artificial wisdom? Could you have, the gurus of the history somehow encapsulated such that you would be able to tap into what they thought and imagined? But then I reread Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, The Black Swan, as he referenced. And I just suddenly thought, well, in a way, when he writes brilliantly about black swans, what he's talking about is things that come out of the blue, complete surprise. They take us completely off balance. Sorry, I've had flu. Apologies for that. And what the impact of those events are off the scale. I mean, they're just, you couldn't have dreamt them if you'd wanted to. And then afterwards, this is also part of his argument, is we sit down and we try and wonder what happened to us just now.
Mm.
Why did it happen? And we think we've understood very often what happened and why, but we very often don't, and therefore we set ourselves up to fail again. So the idea was, if black swans very often take us exponentially where we don't want to go, at least initially, what would it be like to develop solutions to some of the world's greatest problems that take us exponentially where we do want to go, and therefore green swans? And the ugly duckling concept, which I just mentioned, was linked to that in the sense that anyone who knows the children's stories, the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen, will remember the story of the ugly duckling. I mean, it looked weird. I mean, all the other ducks thought it was immensely unpleasant in a way, and yet it wasn't what they thought it was. It was something quite different. And we're surrounded these days by people working on new technologies, new business models, new ways of doing things, new solutions, which to our current eyes look weird. And it was quite odd. I launched the concept of the ugly duckling in Copenhagen, where Hans Christian Andersen was from, in front of the Prime Minister, in front of 1,300 different business leaders and members of the Danish and Swedish royal families. And it seemed to me quite appropriate to do it there. But the central idea is that when we first collide with the future, it often looks very strange, because it's going to be a very different future. And so the encouragement of the book is, think about green swan market trajectories that could take us towards solving climate change, our health issues, our educational challenges, and so on. But as you do that, just look around for some of those sort of strange early stage breakthrough innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, community groups, and try and understand what they're doing, because that actually could be the future already.
No, I think with the ugly duckling, and I think that we have an interesting question also which has come in, which says that you have kind of said that you have written some books earlier when you were in schools, and or you have started writing when you were in schools. And with the kind of metaphors which you put out in the book, I mean, think about it, Ernst Hemingway coming into a Green Swan book. I mean, that's kind of the wide things which you can expect. So the question comes as to, can we expect a children's book from John?
Well, I love the question, and thank you. And it's really weird because every so often, it used to be, and particularly when we had younger children, when I got tired and I got blocked, I've never really had sort of writer's block as they describe it, but I just got tired and I got sort of bored. I would read good children's and particularly well illustrated children's books. So I've always been fascinated by children's literature, and in some ways now with graphic novels and so on, you've got the shift of some forms of design that used to be used only in children's books, shifting across into books for adults. So, for example, I just finished the second volume of Yuval Harari's book, *Sapiens*, yes. And it's graphic, it's visually illustrated, so it's like reading a comic, and yet with some very sort of powerful thinking there. The simple answer to the question is we did write a children's book. It was called The Young Green Consumer's Guide. So in 1988, with a colleague, Julia Hales, I wrote the first of what turned into a series of 8 books on the green consumer, which was a term I coined in the mid-1980s. And that book sold 1 million copies in 18 months. So it was a phenomenon. I mean, we had no idea really that it would kind of behave like that. So the publisher was really interested and was thinking, what other formats could we put this information out in? And one of the things we discovered is that the people who were most active as green consumers, so sort of trying to make the right choices in environmental and animal welfare and so on terms, they were typically women at about the 70% level. And they were 2 particular groups of women. Either they were pregnant, or they were thinking about having children, or they had young children. And quite often the children were coming home and saying, you know, Mummy, why do we have this product on the kitchen table or whatever? I mean, haven't you thought about that? So we thought, well, let's make it worse for mothers and give children more information. And it was highly illustrated, the book. We had some wonderful children's illustrators to do that work for us. And interesting, it didn't upset mothers. It actually, the people it really put pressure on were schools. And so I still sometimes, from different parts of the world, from Alaska, from Australia, from whatever, I get packages of drawings and paintings that school children have done using different editions of that children's book. But that wasn't fiction. That was, you know, here from a child's view, a young person's view, is what is happening and what you might do. I love the idea of writing something for children, but I see it as probably almost the most difficult form of literature that there is. And you know, the people who do it best, in my mind, people like Morris Sendak, extraordinary combination of visuals and imagination and words. I'm not sure I'm up to that, but thank you for the suggestion. I'll put it in the list.
Sure. Back to the book on Green Swan, and John, you do mention in the book somewhere about the placebo effect, but I think the whole placebo effect is eroding. There is this confluence of multiple events which is increasing the risk to the business, right?
Yeah.
And the whole question of what is the business case for sustainability, that has become irrelevant now, and it is a must now. And but in the book you also caution that there are some dark feathers in the Green Swan. So for somebody as a business leader, what would you say? Should you wait for all the feathers to turn green, or you just go ahead with your pathways?
Well, let me just say something very quickly about the placebo effect, because we don't all have the same traffic lights in different parts of the world. But in some parts of the world, you're given the opportunity to press a button when you're about to cross a road. And the idea is that by pressing it, somebody knows that you're there and they will actually put the lights to stop. But as we also often have discovered, they make no difference at all. And so it's a placebo. You do something, or you take something which actually has no effect, but it makes you feel better. And the point in the book was that a lot of what has happened in the corporate social responsibility field for a very long time, and I've been, I've been deeply involved in all of that, has had elements of that placebo effect. People do it because it makes them feel better, not because it actually, to put it crudely, saves the world in any significant way. So that it was a caution. It's not saying don't report, don't engage your stakeholders, all this good stuff. Don't sort of challenge your suppliers and so on. Clearly, all of that is good. But the idea in Green Swans, and this goes to your question about business leaders, I think we're at a very dangerous point in all of this, in the sense that this agenda that many of us have been talking about, in my case, for almost 50 years now, is becoming mainstream. And once things become mainstream, they start to behave in a very, very different way. And people suddenly want to be involved. They want to get behind. They want to have their own positioning, their brands. They all want their slice of the cake in a way. And one of the things that was really surprising to me in going to Glasgow, going to this sort of UN climate conference, was seeing how much, to what a degree now, business leaders are driving this. I did a session with 4 CEOs of Unilever, DSM, IKEA, Acciona, which is a Spanish infrastructure renewable energy company. And what was really surprising is listening to those leaders now. They were speaking in terms that, say, Greenpeace or some of the environmental activists would have been using 15 to 20 years ago. And that's not entirely an accident, because these people have been exposed to campaigners and campaigning through their lives. And what is most striking now, you kindly referenced the first company I set up in 1978. At that time, you could hardly get through the doors, or even the front gates in some cases, of major companies. Now people like us are right through to the boardroom. And if you're not, you wonder, why not? But the reason I say it's dangerous now for business is now what they've seen as out there and as nice to have is becoming fundamentally important to the future of markets, the future of capitalism. And my advice to business leaders, if you aren't already doing this, you might as well say good night and good luck to your company, because this is becoming existential in market after market. And it's not just climate, it's new technologies. And every sector now, whether it's renewable energy, or whether it's cattle ranching, or whether it's energy, transportation, or whatever, there are new technologies that come out that are blowing the old business models out of the water. And the environmental story is now part of that. It's not just something on the edges. It's something that's intrinsic, hardwired into this future that's bubbling up all around us.
So, you very clearly mentioned that people bet big on technology to solve the issue.
Yeah.
You also say that technology is not just, there is a whole lot of policy and behavioral changes and all those things which need to happen around. Yeah. And so from a book like this, what kind of policy changes or things around the behavioral change that you would like to see people get inspired from this book?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly is, there's no guarantee that any particular book is going to sort of take off or succeed. And probably half of the books that I've written have crashed and burned, or at least not gone in the way that I would have hoped. And then some have gone spectacularly in the right direction. And for whatever reason, Green Swans has taken off in a way that I didn't expect. And it's gone around the world, and it's partly helped influence people's language and the way they think. But it's also, I think, it's the right timing. And very often having a book that comes out at the right time is a critical factor in its success. I personally think that we're in, again, a period where for decades now, environmentalists and human rights activists and people lobbying against, campaigning against bribery and corruption, all of these things which are part of the sustainability agenda, are suddenly finding that instead of having to push, there's beginning to become there's a pull. The system is thinking, oh dear, this is systemic. Something is changing now, which is, yes, it's political, it's cultural also, and when younger people wake up to this fact, the future challenges that they'll have to wrestle with, climate chaos and the collapse of major ecosystems and so on, they're going to react. It's not just Greta Thunberg. I mean, just younger people in different parts of the world. And I think you have some of them involved in this festival. I was fascinated to see their names and their stories. And, I would love to know more about what they're doing. Because just finally, when I started in this sort of environmental space, even my own parents thought I'd been sort of infected by some sort of alien intelligence. They thought, something's gone wrong with the boy. And it took 20 years for my father to wake up to what was going on and fully support and celebrate in a way. And I think it's easier in some ways now for younger people because people know what's going on, but it's harder at the same time because for my generation, we were telling people to wake up and pay attention. Now it's actually to change and in very short order, and no, not just the color of your inks or whatever. This is about changing the very economies that we've depended on for so long, and therefore I think existentially, it's a much bigger challenge for younger people nowadays. And I'm 72 now, and I often say I think the next 10 to 15 years of my working career, if I'm spared, are going to be by far the most exciting, by far the most challenging, and by far the most politically dangerous of my entire working life. And one critical element has to be helping older people work with younger people. This is an intergenerational challenge, so we've got to do it together or it won't happen.
Right. And that brings me to, there is a question which has come, the importance of, yes, the social part of it. And I think that really boils down to the 2018 Harvard article which you wrote, right? I mean, when you coined, you didn't see that as a compartmentalization. And it just went into that, many people took it out, the frameworks developed, and suddenly you find that compartmentalization happened. And would like to hear maybe, it was quite unique, a concept which was put out by you, and then after 2 decades you recalled it. Maybe what prompted you to recall that concept as well? To hear directly from you would be great.
Well, it's several things. Firstly is I'd worked with companies like Ford in the early part of the century, and at Ford I was working with people like Bill Ford. So I'd seen that automobile industry at very close quarters, and in that world, a product recall was not a statement that for example, was completely dysfunctional. It was, oh dear, the evidence shows that we've got a problem that we have to adjust. Bring back that product for a period of time and then put it back out again with that problem adjusted. So the idea, which I 3 years ago now, of doing a product recall for the triple bottom line, wasn't saying this is a seriously bad or criminal idea. It was saying there are people who are using it who are not necessarily using it to the best advantage, and they're misunderstanding in many ways. They see it as a trade-off between the economic, the social, the environmental, whereas in fact we always meant it to be a framework within to help people come up with integrated solutions with aspects of all 3 elements working in sympathy and harmony and so on. And recall was actually quite powerful. I mean, it was a bit like a Zen Buddhist moment where you do something completely unexpected and you encourage people to think rather differently about something that they were doing almost on automatic and so on. So I do think that the triple bottom line continues to have great usefulness. So for example, there are now over 4,000 B corporations in different parts of the world who are all now certified and chartered around the triple bottom line. So, you know, it's out there, it's happening. And many of those increasingly are quite big companies. And then we have ESG, so environment, social, and governance. And that's a sort of, in a sense, a child of the triple bottom line discussion. And many people in the space would freely admit that. And that's gone ballistic. It's gone berserk in the last few years. So if you look at the financial world, financial institutions and financial markets, and I've just come off a call with a Scandinavian company, and they're under huge pressure from ESG investors. So everyone's suddenly got religion in this space. And then you mentioned the S in ESG. And very often the economic piece is easy for companies because they just say, oh, you know, we make a profit, so that ticks that side. Whereas the idea wasn't just financial performance, it was wider economic impact. And then environment has become easier because we can measure carbon or we can do that good stuff. It's a pity about the social side. And a great friend and a previous colleague, Shankar Venkataswaran, did a recent piece for me, which is on our website. So we have two websites. One is volans.com, volans.com, and the other is theobservatory.volans.com. And that's what we call the Green Swans Observatory. And there we're sort of trying to pull in examples of green swan or ugly duckling innovation around the world. And what Shankar did was to look at India and how the S, the social side, plays out in your glorious country. And he's worked with salt workers, he's worked with all sorts of severely underprivileged communities historically. He also ran the Indian side of one of my companies, Sustainability, for a number of years, and then went on to Tata and so on. And I think he brings great wisdom to that piece. I mean, it's on the website, it can be freely downloaded. And and it was really interesting. Just last week, Novartis, so a huge pharmaceutical and healthcare company, did a very big event, which I helped co-chair.
Yeah, I was listening to you and Colin Myers.
Right. Well, there were 1,800 people.
So you can now say that I have been stalking you for quite some time.
I love it. I love it. But Shankar's note was spotlighted at one stage, and I thought that's fantastic. That's just it's just some of the Indian experience spreading, and I think very usefully.
And me and Shankar go a long way. We are good friends. So.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. But in any event, one of the great frustrations of my life has been that I have traveled continuously, not clearly since COVID happened. And I've been to places like India and different, whether it's Gujarat or whether it's down in the south, like Bengaluru or whatever. I love the country. I find it absolutely fascinating, but it's frustrating. You just sort of parachute in and parachute out. And one of the things I've decided over the holiday period is just to, and spurred by this festival, is to go back to some of the Indian authors whose books I have and some I haven't. So any suggestions would be immensely welcome.
Sure. So I think we are at the verge of letting you, but then before I let you go, would like to, there is one question which has come in, which I know, you are not debunking the black swan when you are talking about green swan. So, how is that relation between the black and the green swan is one of the questions.
Well, many people on this call may know that Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who came up with the idea of the black swan, has been asked many, many times since COVID hit, is COVID-19 a black swan? And his answer is absolutely not, because we saw pandemics coming, we saw coronavirus pandemics coming, And we had reports to government. The White House and the United States had a special unit which had shut down. We had a special report done for the government in the UK. We ignored it. So this was something that people could see coming. And therefore, it's not a black swan in the sense that it wasn't unknown. And you could say the same about climate change and the climate emergency, and now the biodiversity emergency. I remember once being in India, in Delhi, and talking to two government ministers, and this is probably about 15 years ago, about the Himalayas and what's going to happen with the glaciers as the climate change process engages. And my argument was, you're going to lose the mountain ice, and that's going to starve the major rivers, which is culturally and historically so important to India. And both of them said the same thing. No, it's not going to happen. And it was for them a question of belief. And I'm not saying that that was just those two people. It's something we all suffer from. If something is so big that it's just beyond our comprehension, the easiest thing is to deny it. And I think one of the advantages of literature, and particularly I mentioned science fiction, for example, but it could be children's literature as well, is it helps us see and understand things that we would otherwise be unable to understand and therefore deny, to ignore. So I think what you're doing with the festival is very timely. I think it's a form of leverage, cultural and mental and emotional and psychological leverage, which has huge power over time. So I mean, I wish you every good fortune in expanding your community and expanding the reach and impact of what you're doing. So huge congratulations. It's been a privilege to be part of this first festival.
Thank you very much. And parting words for budding writers, anybody who is just waiting there, just as you said, any wisdom?
I mentioned my wife earlier on, and she will periodically remind me that there were moments where I had sent off articles to magazines or newspapers or whatever, and I just kept getting no's, rejection slips. And then finally, we came back from a trip to the States, and I had written a 12-page article on that. And I said to her, if this one gets a no, I'm never going to write again, which was a bold claim. But anyway, maybe the gods heard me, and that one was accepted. And then from that moment, things changed a little. So keep persevering. Stamina, I think, is immensely important, and faith in yourself. Not arrogance, but the confidence that you do have something important to say, but to constantly listen to see whether what you're saying and what you're writing is connecting with people. I went to a terrible talk last night with somebody talking about artificial intelligence, and he failed completely to connect with his audience. If you fail to do that, your success as a writer of any sort is probably not going to be terribly long lasting. So pay attention to what your audience is thinking, say what's truly on your mind, and don't give up.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Benedict. And it has been wonderful, John, and I'm quite sure that with you, the start of this GLF, we would strive to kind of make this a big success, and we will keep connecting with you through the GLF as well. And whenever you plan to come to India, do let us know as well. So over to you, Benedict.
Yes, thank you so much, John. Thank you, Santosh. It's been a splendid session. Thank you.
Thanks, Benedict.
Thank you.